Not every cage has bars. Some are built from silence, cold shoulders, and the weight of a bond you never chose. I still remember the exact moment I stopped hoping. It wasn't dramatic. There was no fight. No screaming. No final, devastating blow that shattered everything at once. It was a Tuesday. A perfectly ordinary, unbearably quiet Tuesday. I had cooked dinner. Something I'd read in a human cookbook, slow-roasted lamb with rosemary and garlic, the kind of meal that took 3 hours and made the whole house smell like warmth. I set the table. I lit 2 candles. I sat down. And I waited. 7 o'clock became 8. 8 became 10. The candles burned themselves down to nothing, dripping wax onto the white tablecloth I'd ironed that morning. He never came. He didn't call. He didn't send word. He simply didn't come. And when I finally blew out the last dying flame and scraped his untouched plate into the trash, something inside me went very, very quiet. Like a part of me finally accepted what I'd been refusing to believe for 14 months. I was mated to Alpha Caius Dren, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. And I was completely, utterly alone. My name is Selene Voss. I'm 23 years old. I have silver-gray eyes that my mother once called moon-touched, a rare marking among our kind, something the elders called a gift. Caius called it nothing. He had never once looked at my eyes long enough to notice their color. Our mating was arranged by the High Council 14 months ago, a political union between his Ironvale pack and my father's dying bloodline. My father was the last of the Voss seers. A line of wolves with prophetic gifts stretching back 7 centuries. When he died, I became the last. And Caius Dren, always calculating, always 3 moves ahead, accepted the bond because a seer's blood in his lineage would strengthen his claim to pack dominance. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't even a person to him. I was a bloodline. A political asset wrapped in skin. I told myself I could survive it. I told myself I didn't need warmth. I told myself a lot of things in those first dark months. But then, on a frozen morning in February, during a border negotiation I wasn't supposed to attend, I met him. Kael Morrow. Alpha of the Ashbourne pack. Caius's greatest enemy. And the first man in 14 months who looked at me, really looked, and asked, "Are you all right?" 2 words. That's all it took. 2 ordinary words. And I felt them crack something open in my chest that I hadn't even realized had sealed shut. This is the story of what happened after. This is the story of the most dangerous thing I ever did. This is the story of how I fell. Chapter 1. The Ironvale pack's main house sat at the top of a ridge like a fist raised against the sky. It was beautiful, in the way that very cold things are beautiful. All dark stone and iron gates and windows that caught the light but never let it in. I had learned the sounds of it the way you learn a language you never wanted to speak. The particular groan of the 3rd stair. The way the east wing hummed when wind came down from the mountains. The silence that followed Caius through every room he entered. That silence was the worst of it. Not the anger. I could have handled anger. Anger, at least, required acknowledgement. Required the other person to see you as a problem worth solving. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. Caius stood at the head of the long oak table, surrounded by his inner circle. 6 wolves, all male, all wearing the same flat, careful expression that everyone in this pack eventually learned. He didn't look up when I entered. "Sit," he said. I sat. He still didn't look at me. There's a negotiation in 3 days. The border dispute with Ashbourne has escalated. The council has demanded both alphas attend with their full delegations. He finally glanced up, not at me, past me, to the map on the wall behind my head. "You'll attend as my mate. Formal presentation only. You will not speak unless I give you indication to do so. You will not wander. You will not engage with anyone from the Ashbourne delegation. He said it all in the same tone you'd use to brief a junior staff member. Formal presentation. Not partner. Not equal. A display piece. I felt something tight coil in my stomach. Understood, I said quietly. That was when he finally looked at me. Directly. For exactly 2 seconds. His eyes were pale gray, almost silver, not unlike my own, but where mine apparently looked moon-touched, his looked like frozen water. Beautiful. Completely unreachable. Good, he said, and looked away. And that was the entirety of our longest conversation in 3 weeks. I found my friend Mira in the kitchen afterward. She was technically my handmaid, assigned to me on arrival, probably to ensure I didn't do anything politically embarrassing, but she was the closest thing I had to genuine company in this house. She took one look at my face and put a mug of tea in my hands without asking. War room, she guessed. Ashbourne negotiation. 3 days. She went still. You're going? Apparently I'm required, I said, borrowing Elena's word with a dry twist. Mira was quiet for a moment. She wrapped her hands around her own mug. Selene. Ashbourne isn't, Kael Morrow isn't like the alphas you've met through Caius's circle. What do you mean? She hesitated. I mean, be careful. Not because he's dangerous. She paused, searching for words. Because he's kind. And kindness, when you're not used to it anymore, it can feel like a trap even when it isn't. I stared at her. You're warning me about a man because he's kind? She met my eyes. Caius's silence was different. It said, you are not even worth the energy of my displeasure. I was in the library when Elena found me. She was Caius's beta female, sharp-faced, loyal as a blade, and about as warm as one. The alpha requires your presence, she said. Not requests. Not would like. Requires. Even the language here was a reminder. I closed my book slowly. Where? The war room. I looked up at that. The war room was not a place I was ever invited. The war room was where Caius made decisions that moved packs like chess pieces. Why? Elena's expression didn't shift. He didn't explain himself to me. He won't explain himself to you. The war room smelled like iron and old paper and the particular sharp clean scent that was Caius himself, cedar and cold stone, a scent that should have felt like home to my wolf and never quite did. The bond recognized him. My wolf stirred whenever he was near, that low, involuntary hum of mate recognition that I had no control over and absolutely hated. Because it was a lie, that feeling. The bond said mine. But he had made it very clear, in every way that didn't require words, that I was not his. I'm warning you because you've forgotten what it feels like. And remembering can break you open. I lay awake that night in the large, cold bed I had entirely to myself. Caius had a separate room. He had always had a separate room. He said it was because he kept different hours. I had stopped letting myself think about what it really meant. I stared at the ceiling and thought about what Mira had said. Kindness, when you're not used to it anymore, can feel like a trap. I told myself she was wrong. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I had built walls high enough that nothing could crack them. Outside, the wind came down from the mountains. The east wing hummed. And somewhere in this house, my mate slept in another room, as far from me as if I were a stranger. Maybe that's exactly what I am, I thought. And then I closed my eyes. And I didn't let myself cry. I had learned, at least, to do that much. But sleep, when it came, brought something else. A vision. Silver mist and forest. 2 wolves running, one dark as midnight, one pale as snow. Running toward each other. And a voice, low and certain, that I didn't recognize. Some bonds are chosen, seer. And those are the ones that cannot be broken. I woke gasping. Heart pounding. My seer gift had been dormant since I'd come to Iron Vale. Grief and suppression could do that, quiet the prophetic sense like smoke over a flame. But something was waking it. Something was coming. 3 days away. Chapter 2. The drive to the neutral territory took 4 hours through pine-black forest and mountains that looked carved from the same cold material as everything in my life. I sat in the third vehicle. Not the second, that was for Caius's beta, Marcus, and Elena. Not the first, that was Caius. The third. Because I was formal presentation, not inner circle. Mira sat with me, which was the only grace of the journey. She'd brought a thermos of coffee and a silence that didn't feel hostile, which made her, statistically, the best company I had access to. The neutral lodge sat on the exact borderline between Iron Vale and Ashbourne territory. It was a long, low building of pale timber, softer architecture than anything I'd seen in months. More warmth in the wood grain than in Caius's entire fortress. I stepped out of the car into cold February air that smelled of pine resin and snow. And something else. Something I couldn't name yet. Rich and dark and faintly wild, like a forest after rain. My wolf stirred. Not the low, reluctant hum she made for Caius. Something different. Something that made me go very still. Stop it, I told her firmly. She didn't entirely listen. The Ashbourne delegation was already assembled outside the lodge. 7 wolves, their body language loose and easy in a way the Iron Vale pack never was. Less rigid. Less performative. They wore their authority like something they'd been born in, not something they'd armored themselves with. And at the front? He was taller than I'd expected. Dark hair, wind-roughened. A jaw that looked like it had been through a few arguments with the world and come out unchanged. He was broad through the shoulders in the way that spoke of real use, not display. Alpha Kael Morrow. He was in conversation with one of his men, laughing at something, actually laughing, a real sound that didn't seem calculated. His eyes were the color of amber when light hit them. Warm. Even from 20 feet away. Warm. I couldn't remember the last time I'd associated warmth with anyone in authority. The formal greeting required the 2 alphas to acknowledge each other first. Then their delegations. Then. And my mate, Selene Voss, Caius said. He said my name the way you'd indicate a piece of furniture. Not cruel, just absent. I stepped forward. Kael Morrow turned to me. And his eyes, those amber, actually warm eyes, landed on my face. And he went slightly still. Not dramatically. Not noticeably, really, unless you were watching closely. But I was watching closely, because watching closely was how I'd survived 14 months in a place where every subtle shift carried meaning. He recovered in a breath. Inclined his head with genuine respect, not a performed gesture, something that came from his spine rather than his social training. Selene, he said. My name, just my name, without the Dren attached. It's a pleasure. And then, quiet, so that only someone standing as close as I was could hear. Are you all right? I blinked. The question hit me somewhere completely unguarded. Are you all right? Not pleased to meet you. Not a power statement. Not a political maneuver dressed as courtesy. Just, are you all right? I stopped. Said the safe thing. The trained thing. Of course. Thank you. He held my gaze for exactly 1 beat longer than protocol required. And in that beat, something passed between us that I didn't have a word for. Not attraction, or not only attraction. Something more like recognition. Like he had looked at me and seen the thing I had spent 14 months teaching everyone not to see. Then he moved on to greet the next person. And I stood there with my heart doing something it had no business doing. The first session was all territorial language, dry, technical, the kind of negotiation that required you to have memorized 300 years of pack law to follow. I was seated along the wall with the secondary delegation members. Not at the table. Along the wall. I kept my face perfectly composed and stared at a fixed point 3 inches above the treaty maps. I was good at this. Invisible but present. A witness who didn't officially witness anything. An hour in, someone sat in the empty chair beside me. I expected Mira. "You look like you're doing arithmetic," said a male voice, low and amused. I turned. It wasn't Mira. It was one of the Ashbourne wolves, young, maybe 20, with bright eyes and the kind of face that smiled easily. "Excuse me?" I said quietly. "Your expression," he said, keeping his voice under the level of the discussion at the main table. "You count things when you're bored." "The ceiling panels, I think?" "I've been watching." He tilted his head. "RHY. Ashbourne Pack, 3rd tier. You're the Alpha's mate, right?" I glanced toward the main table automatically. Caius was deep in discussion, turned away. "Selene," I said carefully. "I know," RHY said, easy and warm. "Kael mentioned you." I looked at him sharply. "He did?" "Said to treat you like a person, not a political asset." RHY shrugged, like this was a completely normal thing for an alpha to say about the opposing pack's mate. "He's particular about that stuff." I didn't know what to do with that. Like a person. Like it needed to be said. Like it was worth saying. Like it wasn't assumed. During the break, I slipped outside for air. The cold hit my face like a clean answer to a question I hadn't asked. I stood on the timber deck and breathed pine resin and snow. And he was already there. Kael Morrow. Leaning on the railing, apparently also in need of cold air. He glanced at me when I came out. Made a small gesture, "The space is yours, no pressure," then returned his gaze to the tree line. I should have gone back inside. Protocol said go back inside. I stayed. We stood in silence for a moment. But it was different from Iron Veil silence. It wasn't loaded. It wasn't a punishment. It was just 2 people breathing. "The ceiling panels," he said finally, without looking at me. I blinked. "Sorry?" "You were counting them." His mouth curved, just slightly. "I do the same thing in council sessions. Except I do the floor tiles. 17 by 24, in case you were wondering." I stared at him. And then, completely without permission, entirely against my will, I laughed. A small sound. Surprised out of me. He glanced at me then, and something shifted in his face. Briefly. Like the sight of it had caught him off guard. "There it is," he said softly. "There what is?" He turned back to the forest. "Nothing," he said. "Just, nothing." He pushed off the railing and went back inside. I stood on the deck in the cold, my hand against my sternum where something was pressing. Something uncomfortable. Something that felt horribly, dangerously like hope. Why had he looked at me like that? Why had he asked if I was all right? Why did I care? Why, for the first time in 14 months, did I feel like someone might actually answer if I called out? I pressed my hand harder against my chest. Felt my wolf pacing. Felt the mating bond with Caius like a cold thread, present, real, impossible to ignore. And somewhere underneath it, newer and more terrifying. A warmth that had no business being there at all. Chapter 3. The second day of negotiations started with tension that had nothing to do with me. Overnight, someone had crossed the border. An Ashbourne scout, young, unmated, no aggressive intent recorded, had strayed 300 meters into Iron Veil territory. By accident, his alpha swore. A navigation error in unfamiliar forest. Caius did not accept this explanation. He arrived at the morning session with that particular flatness in his expression that I had learned to fear more than anger, because it was the face he wore right before he did something cold and decisive and irreversible. "The scout should be handed to our custody for questioning," he said. His voice was level. Perfectly controlled. Trespass on Alpha territory is not a navigational error. It is a provocation. Across the table, Kael Morrow went very still. Not the stillness of someone trying to control anger. The stillness of someone who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the moment to express it. The scout is 20 years old, Kael said. His voice was quiet. Exactly as controlled as Caius's, but somehow warmer. Even in opposition. He has no combat training. His wolf panicked in a snowstorm and lost direction. Handing him to you for interrogation would be pack law, Caius said. Flat. Excessive, Kael finished. The room went silent. The two alphas looked at each other across the treaty maps and the air between them tightened to something you could almost hear. This was the thing about powerful males. Disagreement between them didn't sound like arguing. It sounded like two tectonic plates deciding whether to slide or shatter. I was along the wall again. Mira was beside me, her hand very slightly touching my elbow, a grounding gesture she developed over months of watching me navigate high-tension situations. I watched Caius. His jaw was set. His eyes were flat. He was going to push this. Not because the scout was a real threat. Because being challenged, even gently, in a formal setting, that was something Caius's pride did not know how to absorb. He would make an example. He always made examples. The scout is 20 years old. Something moved in my chest. Uncomfortable and insistent. I thought about being 20 years old. I had been 21 when the bond was arranged. 22 when I arrived at Ironvale. I knew what it was to be young and in the wrong place and completely at someone else's mercy. It happened before I fully decided to do it. Alpha Dren. My voice was quiet. But the room was very quiet too, and it carried. Every head turned. Including Caius. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, not quite anger, not quite shock. Something sharper. Something that said, "What are you doing?" I met his eyes. Held them. My heart was hammering but my voice stayed even. The Council's neutrality clause applies here. A youth who strayed during a weather event cannot legally be classified as an intentional incursion under Article 9 of the Border Accord. I paused. I believe that was established in the Greywood mediation. 12 years ago. Silence. I knew this because my father had been a seer who'd spent his life studying pack law, because prophetic gifts without contextual knowledge were worthless, he'd always said. He'd made sure I could cite 3 centuries of legal precedent before I was 18. It was the first time that knowledge had ever left my mouth in Caius's presence. He had never asked for it. Kael Morrow was looking at me. Not with surprise. With something that looked almost like recognition, again. Like he'd suspected this about me and was simply watching it be confirmed. The council liaison cleared his throat. "She's correct," he said carefully. Article 9, Subclause 4. Greywood Mediation, Year 47. The scout cannot be held without formal intent verification. Caius looked at the liaison. Then back at me. A long, measured moment. "Fine," he said. Quiet. Precise. The scout is released with a formal warning on record. He didn't thank me. He didn't acknowledge that I'd just saved the negotiation from collapsing, and possibly saved a 20-year-old wolf from something much worse. He simply moved on. Like I had handed him a document he required. During the lunch break, Mira grabbed my arm and walked me fast toward the quieter end of the hallway. "Selene," she whispered. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, I admitted. He's going to be furious. Probably. Was it worth it? I thought about the young scout. I thought about being young and afraid and at someone else's mercy. "Yes," I said. Mira looked at me for a long moment. Then she hugged me. Quickly, fiercely. Okay, she said. Okay. Good. I was washing my hands in the small washroom near the east corridor when the door opened. I expected Elena. Or Mira. It was Kael Morrow. He stopped when he saw me, registered the location, assessed whether to retreat. Then, apparently deciding that would be more awkward than proceeding, he stepped in and let the door close behind him. The room was very small. He was very large. He smelled like that rain and forest scent again, deeper this time, closer. My wolf went very still. The attentive kind of still. Sorry, he said, and he did look it. I can. It's fine, I said. Reaching for a towel. Keeping my movements normal. He crossed to the other basin. We stood for a moment in this small room, side by side, being extremely normal about washing our hands. Greywood mediation, he said. His voice was conversational. Article 9. You knew that from memory. My father's collection, I said. Pack law was his secondary area. Your father was the Voss seer. Yes. A pause. What was his primary area? The question surprised me. Everyone who knew my father's name always asked about the seer gifts. The prophecies. The bloodline. No one ever asked about the man. Stars, I said, before I'd decided whether to say it. He tracked star patterns. He thought prophecy was just pattern recognition at a scale most people couldn't perceive. I paused. He was probably right. Kael turned off the tap. Reached for a towel. Looked at me in the small mirror above the basin, catching my reflection. He sounds like someone worth knowing, he said. My throat did something inconvenient. He was, I said. Kael held my gaze in the mirror for a moment. Then, quietly, what you did in there, that took something. I want you to know I noticed. I looked away first. Because I wasn't ready to be looked at like that. I wasn't ready for the warmth of it. It felt like standing too close to a fire when you've been cold so long you've forgotten fire can be gentle. It was just pack law, I said. No, he said. It wasn't. He moved to the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. Selene. I looked up. For what it's worth, he stopped. Seemed to reconsider. Then, your father raised someone worth knowing too. He left. And I stood in the small washroom with my hands still damp and my chest entirely too full of something I could not name and absolutely could not afford. That night, Caius came to my room. He never came to my room. I was sitting in the chair by the window, still dressed, not quite able to settle, when the door opened. He filled the doorframe. Looked at me. His expression was the controlled kind. The kind that told me nothing about what was happening underneath. You spoke out of turn today, he said. I cited pack law, I said carefully. Accurately. In front of a rival alpha. Without my permission. Permission. I absorbed that. I was preventing an international incident. He was quiet for a moment. Do not do it again, he said. He turned to leave. Something in me, the part that Kael Morrow had somehow cracked a millimeter of light into, spoke before I could stop it. Did it help? Caius stopped. Didn't turn. Did what help? Preventing it. The incident. Did it help the negotiation? A long beat. Yes, he said. Barely. Then I'd do it again, I said. Quietly. Steadily. With or without permission. He stood in the doorframe for 3 more seconds. And then he left without another word. I turned back to the window. Outside, the border forest was dark and deep. Somewhere out there, Ashbourne territory began. I pressed my fingertip to the cold glass. And wondered, for the first time, what it looked like on the other side. What was happening to me? Was it the 2 days away from the stone and iron of Ironvale? Was it the cold February air that smelled different here, like something living, something with roots? Or was it the way a man I had no right to think about had looked at me in a mirror and said, "Your father raised someone worth knowing"? I closed my eyes. The vision from 3 nights ago flickered behind them. 2 wolves running toward each other. A pale wolf and a dark one. Some bonds are chosen, seer. I pushed it away. I pushed all of it away. I was Selene Voss. I was mated. I was bound by law and blood, and a bond one never chose. And whatever I was feeling, whatever crack had opened in the walls I had built, I would seal it. I had to. Didn't I? Didn't I? Chapter 4. The drive back to Ironvale took 4 hours. It felt longer. I watched the pine forest blur past the window and tried to rebuild what I'd spent 2 days quietly dismantling. The walls. The careful numbness. The practiced art of wanting nothing so that nothing could be taken. Mira slept beside me, her head tipped against the window. I envied her. Sleep felt very far away. The thing about being seen, really seen, after a long time of invisibility, is that it doesn't feel like relief. Not immediately. It feels like pain. Like a limb that's been numb so long that returning circulation is indistinguishable from injury. Kael Morrow had looked at me twice. Said 14 words that weren't political. And somehow that was enough to make 14 months of careful walls feel like they were made of paper. That terrified me. What kind of person falls apart over 14 words? A person who's been starving, something answered. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and watched trees become mountains, become the long dark road home. Elena was waiting at the gate when we arrived. She had the expression she wore when she had information she'd been holding and was ready to deploy. Council envoy arrived this morning, she told Caius the moment he stepped out of the lead car. Requesting a formal report on the negotiation outcomes. Schedule it for tomorrow, Caius said, moving past her. Elena's eyes slid to me briefly. Something in them that might, on a warmer face, have been assessment. She looked away. I went inside. My room felt smaller when I returned to it. I hadn't noticed before, or I had, and had simply filed it under "this is your life now, stop noticing." But coming back from a place with soft timber walls and open corridors, coming back to stone and iron and careful silence. The smallness was impossible to ignore. I unpacked my bag slowly. Set things back in their places. Every object in its assigned position. There was a strange comfort in that, I supposed. The predictability of arranged things. At least objects stayed where you put them. At least objects didn't look at you like they were measuring the distance between who you were and who you were pretending to be. I found the note 3 days later. Not a dramatic discovery, it wasn't hidden or secret or cinematic. It was tucked inside the copy of the border accord that the council liaison had sent as formal record of the negotiation. A small piece of paper folded once. My name on the outside in handwriting I didn't recognize. Clean. Slightly angular. Decisive strokes. I unfolded it. The Greywood precedent also applies to information freely shared. I looked it up. KM. That was all. I looked it up. He had gone home and looked up the citation I had used. Not to verify it, I had been correct, we both knew it. Just to look. To follow the thread I had offered. To show that he had listened. I sat with the note for a long time. Read it twice. Then I did something I could not entirely explain. I wrote back. It was a reckless thing to do. I knew it was reckless. But the part of me that had rebuilt the walls kept meeting the part of me that had stood in a small washroom and heard your father raised someone worth knowing, and the second part kept winning, inch by careful inch. I wrote on plain paper. Nothing identifying. The Greywood mediation also established that information freely offered cannot later be claimed as trespass. You're welcome. SV. I used my birth initials. Not Dren. Voss. The name I was born with. The name that was mine before it was politically useful to anyone. I folded it. Addressed it to the Ashbourne Pack's formal administrative contact, legitimate enough to survive any inspection, and sent it with the weekly council mail. And then I sat with the particular combined feeling of having done something slightly dangerous and completely right, which is one of the most uncomfortable feelings in the world because it makes it very hard to regret yourself. Caius's fury, when it came, was not about the note. He didn't know about the note. His fury was about something else entirely. It came on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the negotiation, in the form of Marcus's his beta, broad-shouldered and carefully blank-faced, appearing at my door before 8. The Alpha wants a meeting, Marcus said. In his office. Not the war room this time. His office. That was different. The office was personal space. I went. Caius was standing at the window when I entered. His office faced east, sharp morning light cutting across the dark wood of the floor. It made him look like he was standing at the edge of something. He turned when I came in. And I saw immediately that something had shifted. Not the cold flatness. Something underneath it. Something with an edge. The council envoy's report included a notation, he said without preamble. About your intervention during the negotiation. I stayed still. All right. They called it, he paused. Like the words tasted odd. Diplomatically significant. They're requesting that you attend future Interpack negotiations as part of the official Iron Veil delegation. I processed that. As part of the delegation, I said. Not along the wall. Something crossed his face. Too fast to name. Yes. I waited for the but. This is not an invitation, he said. It is a directive from the council. You will attend. You will not mistake their recognition of your usefulness for permission to exceed your role. Exceed your role. I held that phrase carefully. Turned it over. Set it down. Understood, I said. I turned to leave. Selene. First time he had used my name without it being a logistical necessity. I stopped. Didn't turn. The citation was accurate, he said. I waited. I had it verified. He had verified it. After the meeting. In private. He had checked my work. Not to catch a mistake. To confirm I was right. My throat tightened. I know, I said. And I walked out. That night my wolf ran. Not literally, I hadn't shifted in months. Another thing I'd suppressed, locked down, filed under too much feeling for this life. But she ran in my dreams. Forest and darkness and the full-body freedom of 4 paws instead of careful, measured steps. She ran toward something. Not away from anything. Toward. I woke at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding and pine resin somehow in my lungs like a ghost of scent. And I lay in the dark and thought about a man I had no business thinking about. His amber eyes. The way he stood, easy, rooted. Like someone who took up space not as a threat but as a simple fact of existing. Are you all right? I pressed my palm to my sternum. The mating bond pulsed there, faint and cold as always. But underneath it, something warmer. Something that had no name yet. Something I was going to have to be very, very careful about. The reply came 8 days later. Same route. Council mail. SV, the precedent holds. Though I'd argue some trespasses are worth the consequence. KM. I read it 4 times. Each time, my pulse did something complicated. Some trespasses are worth the consequence. Was that about pack law? Was that about something else? I folded the note. Put it inside the hollowed spine of a thick law volume my father had given me, the safest place I owned. And I sat with the feeling of having a secret that was simultaneously the most dangerous and most alive thing in my current existence. My wolf pressed her nose to the inside of my ribs. For the first time in months, she wasn't pacing. She was listening. It was Mira who first said what I was refusing to think. She found me in the library, my default sanctuary, rereading the border accord for the third time that week, which was medically unnecessary. She sat across from me. Looked at me with the expression she used when she decided that kindness required honesty. "You're reading pack law for a negotiation that ended 2 weeks ago," she said. "I like being thorough," I said. "You're thinking about him." I turned a page. "I don't know what you mean." "Selene." Her voice was very gentle. "I know what I mean. And so do you." I set the book down. Looked at her. "It's nothing," I said. "It was 2 days. He was decent to me." I stopped. Tried again. "I'm just not used to decent." Mira was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's exactly what worries me. I'm not doing anything wrong." "I know you're not." She leaned forward. "But Selene, Kael Morrow isn't just another alpha. He and Caius have history that goes back years. Real history. Bad blood. If Caius ever thought." "He won't think anything," I said. "Because there is nothing to think." Mira looked at me. Held my eyes. "Make sure it stays that way," she said quietly. "Not for Caius. For you." She got up and left me alone with the border accord and the law volume with the hollow spine and the question that was becoming harder to suppress with every passing day. What does it mean when the only warmth in your world comes from the one place you're forbidden to reach? Chapter 5. 3 weeks later, the council scheduled another session. This time, it was full diplomatic proceedings, both packs, both alphas, expanded delegations, 2-day formal summit. This time, I was on the list. Official Ironvale delegation. My name in the documentation. Not along the wall. At the table. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I was attending as a legal resource, a diplomatic asset, exactly what Caius had said, useful. I told myself the small, treacherous flutter in my chest when I read the summit schedule was about the work. About finally being allowed to contribute. About using my father's knowledge for something that mattered. I told myself all of this. My wolf didn't believe a word of it. We arrived at the neutral lodge on a Tuesday. March now, the snow had thinned enough to show the dark earth underneath, that particular threshold moment when winter acknowledges its losing. The Ashbourne delegation was arriving simultaneously. Their vehicles pulling in as ours did, parallel, the 2 packs emerging into the gray morning light like mirror images separated by law and bloodshed and decades of grievance. I stepped out. Cold air. Pine resin. And underneath it. That scent. Rain and dark forest and something alive and specific that I had spent 3 weeks not thinking about. My pulse jumped. I kept my face absolutely neutral. You are a diplomat, I told myself. You are here to cite law and be useful. That is all. Kael was already out of his vehicle. He was in conversation with his beta, a tall woman named Dara who I'd noticed at the first summit, sharp-eyed and capable, who seemed to function as both second and strategist. He didn't look toward our vehicles. He was focused, professional, in that mode of alpha informal setting that wore authority like a second skin. Then someone from his delegation said something, and he turned. And his eyes found me. Not searched for me. Found me. Like he'd known exactly where to look. Something moved across his face, quickly, controlled, and then he returned to his conversation with Dara. But not before I caught it. Not before I saw what it was. The same thing I was feeling in my own chest. That complicated, inconvenient, entirely unwelcome warmth. The first session was territorial review. Maps and percentages and resource rights and all the language of land ownership that packs dressed in legality to avoid saying this is where we're willing to go to war. I was at the table. End seat, Ironvale side. Across from me, end seat, Ashbourne side, was Dara. She assessed me in one clean glance when I sat down. Not hostile, but thorough. The kind of assessment that a good beta gives potential complications. I met her gaze steadily and opened my documentation. She gave me a small nod. Respect, maybe. Or at least a provisional absence of contempt. I'd take it. The session ran 4 hours. I spoke 3 times. Twice to cite precedent when the legal language threatened to tip toward interpretation that would have disadvantaged the proceedings. Once to suggest a rewording of Article 7 that removed an ambiguity both sides had been quietly using to mean different things, resolving a confusion that had apparently been causing friction for 18 months without either pack formally identifying it. After the 3rd time, I looked up to find Caius watching me. Not with the cold flatness. Something more complex. Something I didn't have enough data to read. Across the table, Dara was making a small notation on her legal pad. And at the far end of the Ashbourne side, Kael was looking at the revised Article 7 language. His expression was neutral. But his hand, resting on the table, had relaxed. Like a tension he'd been carrying had eased slightly. The formal dinner that evening was the part one had been simultaneously dreading and trying not to anticipate. Long tables. Both delegations seated together, protocol required proximity, apparent goodwill, the performance of civilization between people with sharp teeth. I was placed near the center. Caius was at the head of his side. By the architecture of the seating arrangement, which some council administrator had designed with either complete innocence or a dark sense of humor, I was 3 seats away from Kael Morrow. 3 seats. Close enough to hear his voice without effort. Close enough to catch that scent without looking for it. I ate my first course with the concentrated focus of someone diffusing something. His voice reached me midway through the 2nd course. He was speaking to the council liaison beside him, something about the revised article, the wording change. It resolved something we'd been circling for a year and a half, he was saying. Whoever caught it, he paused. Selene, was it? Said casually. To the liaison. Not to me. The liaison glanced toward me. Ms. Voss Dren, yes. Quite sharp. Voss, Kael said. Mild, conversational. The seer's daughter. That's right. I did not look up from my plate. Remarkable family, Kael said. And then he said nothing further. But 30 seconds later I felt eyes on me, and when I glanced up, he was in conversation with Dara again. Not looking at me. Except his mouth had the smallest curve. Like he knew I'd been listening. Like he'd said it for me. You absolute. I looked back at my plate. Stop it, I told my wolf. She was practically vibrating. Stop it right now. After dinner, the delegations separated into informal groupings. Caius went immediately into closed conversation with 2 council members. Elena positioned herself 2 feet from his elbow as always. The room filled with the particular noise of formal people relaxing by exactly calculated degrees. I found a quieter corner near the bookshelves. Force of habit. Took a glass of something amber and warm and stood there being professionally unobtrusive. The Greywood precedent. His voice was quiet enough that it was just for me. I didn't startle. I'd felt him approach, that awareness, that particular shift in the air that I was becoming dangerously accustomed to. I turned. He was standing at an appropriate distance. Glass in hand. Apparently looking at the bookshelves. You memorized it, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I looked into several articles after the first summit. He tilted his head, studying the book spines. You have a habit of citing things exactly. No approximation. My father didn't believe in approximation. Nor do I. A beat. We probably would have gotten along. My throat did the thing again. I took a measured sip from my glass. Don't, I said quietly. He looked at me then. Directly. Don't what? Keep doing that. I kept my voice low. Even. Saying things like that. His expression was unreadable for a moment. Then, like what, specifically? Like, I stopped. Started again. Like you're interested in who I am. Rather than what I represent in this room. A pause. I am interested in who you are, he said. Simply. Without apology or performance. That's the problem. I looked at him. He looked back. The room continued around us, voices, crystal, the shuffling of formal people doing formal things, and in our small, quiet corner, something stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. This is a very dangerous conversation, I said. Yes, he agreed. We shouldn't be having it. Probably not. He looked back at the bookshelf. And yet. And yet. 2 words. 2 words that somehow contained everything I'd been arguing with myself about for 3 weeks. I'm mated, I said. Flat. Final. A reminder aimed at myself as much as at him. I know. To your enemy. I know that too. Then why? Because, he said, very quietly, you cited a 14-month-old diplomatic precedent from memory to protect a scared 20-year-old I barely know. And you did it knowing your mate wouldn't thank you for it. He paused. And that tells me more about who you are than anything else in this room. I stared at the bookshelf. My heart was doing something it absolutely should not be doing. Go back to your side of the table, Alpha Morrow, I said softly. A beat. Of course, he said. And he did. And I stood in my corner with my amber drink and my hammering pulse and the distinct feeling that I had just barely not stepped off the edge of something. Barely. The wire between us didn't go slack when he walked away. It stayed taut. Like it was attached to something neither of us controlled. Mira found me 20 minutes later. She appeared at my elbow with the quiet efficiency she used when she was actively running reconnaissance. You were talking to him, she said. Under her breath. Not accusatory. Terrified. Briefly, I said. Selene. I know. Elena was watching. My blood went cold. Not dramatically. A clean, precise drop in temperature. How long? I asked. I don't know. I noticed it late. Myra's hand found my wrist, a tiny, grounding pressure. She might not have seen anything significant. You were both looking at the bookshelves. Right. It might be fine. Right, I said again. But we both knew Elena did not watch things casually. Elena watched things the way a strategist watched a board, looking for angles, pressure points, pieces that were moving when they shouldn't be. I thought about the hollow spine of the law volume. The folded notes inside. SV. KM. Nothing identifying. Nothing Caius could prove. The thought that I was thinking in terms of what could be proved made me feel sick. And then, underneath the fear, quieter and more persistent. Some trespasses are worth the consequence. I pressed my fingers to my sternum. Both pulses were there. The bond, cold and certain as iron. And something else, warm and terrifying and impossible to name. And increasingly impossible to deny. Chapter 6. She came to me the next morning. Before breakfast. Before the second session. Before I had rebuilt enough of myself to be fully armored. Elena stood in my doorway in the gray early light and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not cold. Not the efficient blankness she wore as default. Something more careful than that. Something that might, on a face with less discipline, have been concern. "Can I come in?" she said. I stepped back. She entered, closed the door, and stood in the center of the room like she was conducting an internal analysis of the space before committing to anything. "The conversation last night," she said finally. I kept my breathing even. "Which one?" "You know which one." I looked at her steadily. "We discussed the article revision." "You discussed it for approximately 4 minutes, Elena said. And then you discussed other things." "Legal precedent," I said. "His expression when he speaks to you," Elena said, "is not the expression of a man discussing legal precedent." Silence. I let it sit. Counted to 3. "What is it you want to say, Elena?" She was quiet for a moment. Crossed her arms. Something shifting in her face that looked almost like effort. Like she was working against her own grain. "I want to say," she started. Stopped. Started again. "I want to say that I don't enjoy my role in this house." My role being, a pause. Watching. Reporting. Keeping things in order. I stared at her. This was not the conversation I had expected. I do it because it's my function and because Caius's stability matters to the pack. She met my eyes. Direct. Uncomfortable. "Not because I enjoy it." "I didn't think you enjoyed it," I said carefully. "No. But I want you to understand that if I report something, it's not personal. It's your function," I said. She inclined her head. I breathed. Measured my next words like I was measuring steps across ice. "Is there something to report?" I asked. Elena looked at me for a long moment. "Not yet," she said. "Not no. Not there's nothing. Not yet." An edge. A warning. A door held open by exactly 1 inch. "Elena," I said, slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" She adjusted the cuffs of her jacket. Her jaw was set. "Because you cited Article 9, she said. "And saved a young wolf who had nothing to do with the politics of this mess." Another pause. "And because Caius, he doesn't," she stopped. I waited. She didn't finish the sentence. But I heard it anyway. "Caius doesn't see what he has." She turned to the door. "Be careful," she said. Not warmly. Not coldly. A simple, practical directive. "I'm trying," I said. She left. I sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. Elena had just warned me. Elena, Caius's beta female, his most loyal instrument, had come to my room before sunrise and given me a warning instead of a report. What did that mean? What did it mean that even the people closest to Caius saw something in him that they couldn't defend? What did it mean that his own beta female stood in my room with something like guilt on her face? What kind of mate was he, I thought, that even the people who served him absolutely couldn't quite bring themselves to? I stopped that thought. Sealed it. Put it somewhere I wasn't going to open this morning. The second session was longer than the first. 6 hours, with a short break at midday. I cited 4 precedents. Caught 2 significant ambiguities. Suggested 1 rewording that the council liaison later said resolved a tension that had been festering since year 43. I was useful. I was accurate. I was professional. And I did not once let myself look at the amber eyes at the far end of the Ashbourne side for longer than was professionally explicable. Once. During the midday break, stepping out for water. He was at the end of the corridor. Head bent toward Dara, listening to something she was saying. I almost didn't see him see me. But he did. A fractional glance. A fractional nod. Like checking in. Are you all right? Not the words this time. Just the check. Just the awareness. I see you. 3 seconds. I looked away. And the wire pulled taut again. The complication arrived at 4 in the afternoon. His name was Aldrich. Alpha Aldrich Vane of the Westmore Pack, a territory that bordered both Ironvale and Ashbourne, geographically positioned like a thumb pressing on a bruise. He wasn't officially part of the summit. He arrived as an observer, a council-permitted role that nobody could refuse and everyone at the table disliked immediately. I disliked him in approximately 4 seconds. He had the kind of handsomeness that knew about itself. The kind of confidence that came not from competence but from having been told, repeatedly, that his presence was an event. He swept into the session room like he was doing it a favor. His eyes moved across the table, alpha to beta to asset, the automatic calculation of a man who converted everything and everyone into a hierarchy. His eyes landed on me. And stayed. Longer than was polite. Longer than was professional. Alpha Dren, he said smoothly, settling into the observer's seat. And this would be, his smile arrived. Practiced. Polished. Your mate. I've heard. Selene, Caius said. Flatly. Selene. Aldrich repeated my name like he was testing the weight of it. The Voss seer's daughter. Quite a heritage for one woman to carry. I looked at him with the expression I had perfected in 14 months, polite, composed, absolutely unreadable. Thank you, I said, in a tone that meant nothing. He smiled wider. He was not someone who accepted social deflection. He was someone who treated it as an invitation. This is going to be a problem, I thought. Across the table, I felt rather than saw Kael go very still. The particular quality of stillness that wasn't calm. That was a predator registering something that needed watching. And underneath the complication of Aldrich Vane's calculating smile and Kael's too still posture and Elena's morning warning. My seer gift flickered. Not a full vision. Just a feeling. Like standing at a crossroads in fog. Multiple paths. All of them with consequences. Something is about to break, the gift whispered. Question is, what, and who breaks it, and who gets caught underneath. The session resumed. Outside, the snow had started again. Chapter 7. Aldrich Vane did not leave after the session. He stayed for dinner. He stayed for the informal gathering after dinner. He stayed the way certain people stay, not because they were invited to remain, but because removing them would require a confrontation nobody had formally initiated yet, and he knew it. He was good at that. Finding the gap between unwelcome and technically within protocol and making it his permanent address. I watched him work the room. That was the right word for it, work. He moved from cluster to cluster with the efficiency of someone running a very sophisticated social calculation, dispensing attention like a currency he was investing, not spending. With the council members, deference just enough. The practiced humility of a man who wanted something from them and knew that flatness of ego was the price of admission. With Caius, careful respect. Equal to equal. The particular male language of two dominant wolves acknowledging each other's territory without either one stepping back. With me. He came for me 40 minutes in. I was near the windows, my default corner, the one with sightlines to the room and a wall at my back. Old habit. Caius's world had taught me that much. Aldrich appeared at my side with a glass of wine he hadn't asked if I wanted and held it out with a smile that had been carefully constructed to look effortless. You look like someone calculating exits, he said. I took the glass because refusing it would have been the opening move of a conversation I didn't want. I'm watching the snow, I said. He glanced at the window. Beautiful, he agreed. Then, looking back at me, the view, I mean. I held my expression perfectly still. How long have you been with the Ironvale pack? He asked, his tone shifting to something more conversational, less performing. Like he was genuinely curious about the answer. That was the dangerous thing about Aldrich, I was beginning to understand. Underneath the polish was something that paid real attention. 14 months, I said. And before that, the Voss, he paused. Recalibrated. You grew up outside pack territory? My father preferred solitude for research, I said. We lived on the northern boundary. Adjacent to 3 packs. Technically none. Unusual, he said. For a Sears family. He was an unusual man. Aldrich studied me for a moment. You miss him, he said. Not cruelly. Observationally. My throat tightened. Yes, I said. Because lying seemed more exposing than truth in this instance. He nodded. Sipped his own drink. Was quiet for a moment, which was not what I expected. The citation you used yesterday, he said. Article 9. I looked it up last night. I went still. He'd looked it up. 2 men had now gone home and looked up my legal citation. For opposite reasons, I suspected. The Greywood mediation, I said carefully. It's fairly standard. It's fairly obscure, he corrected, not unkindly. My own legal team wasn't aware of the subclause. He tilted his head. You knew it from memory. I had a thorough education. You had a father who treated you like an intellect rather than an inheritance, Aldrich said. Something in his voice that was almost wistful? That's rarer than the citation. I looked at him properly then. Trying to find the angle. Trying to locate where this was going. He met my gaze with an openness that was either entirely genuine or very, very good counterfeit. What do you want, Alpha Vane? I asked quietly. He smiled. This one was different from the entrance smile. Less architecture. More real. Conversation, he said. Surprisingly enough. A beat. And perhaps an alliance. But that can wait for morning. He inclined his head, a small, courteous gesture, and moved away. I stood with my wine and the distinct feeling of having been read by someone I hadn't consented to being read by. 2 men reading me in 2 nights. For entirely different reasons. With entirely different intentions. And the one I trusted, in spite of every rational argument against it, was the one I was forbidden to trust. I felt Kael before I saw him. That awareness again, the shift in air pressure, the particular charge that arrived with him like weather. He didn't come close. He was across the room, in conversation with Dara, and he didn't look toward my corner. But he had positioned himself with a clear sightline to where Aldrich had been standing. He had been watching. Not possessively, that wasn't the right word. Something more like vigilance. Like someone keeping track of a variable they didn't entirely trust. Dara said something to him, and he responded without looking away from the middle distance. And then, finally, his gaze tracked, just briefly, to mine. A question in it. Are you all right? Never with words now. Always with that look. I gave him the smallest nod. Fine. Something in his shoulders released a fraction. He looked back to Dara. And I stood in my corner and thought about what it meant, that a man who owed me nothing, who I owed nothing, who existed on the wrong side of every line that governed my life, was the only one in this room tracking whether I was okay. I was in the corridor heading back to my room when Marcus found me. He materialized from a side hallway with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting. Alpha Dren wants a word, he said. My pulse steadied. Where? His room. I followed. Caius was standing at the window again. This seemed to be his natural position in uncertain moments, facing outward, back to the room. I stepped inside. Closed the door. Aldrich Vane spoke to you for 11 minutes, Caius said. He had timed it. Or someone had. He approached me, I said, I know. A pause. What did he want? Conversation. He said. I paused. And he mentioned a potential alliance. To be discussed in the morning, he said. Caius turned then. His pale gray eyes moved across my face. Reading something. I didn't know what. He's positioning, Caius said. Westmore has been trying to wedge between Ironvale and Ashbourne's border dispute for 3 years. If he can offer himself as neutral arbiter, he gains access to both territories, I said. And leverage over both packs. Caius looked at me. Yes, he said. A pause. Longer than usual. What did you think of him? He asked. I stared at him. Caius Dren was asking my opinion. Of a political player. Like it mattered. Like he might actually use the information. I straightened slightly. He's intelligent, I said carefully. More than he wants to appear. The performance of charm is deliberate, he uses it to make people relax their assessment of him. I paused. Don't relax your assessment of him. Caius was quiet for a moment. Looking at me with that unreadable expression. You have good instincts, he said. 4 words. Not thank you. Not well done. But. Good instincts. From Caius Dren, in 14 months, that was nearly a declaration. I didn't know what to do with it. Will that be all? I asked. He turned back to the window. Yes. I left. And stood in the corridor outside his door and pressed my back to the cold stone wall and breathed through the complexity of being noticed, finally, by the wrong person. Too little. Too late. Or was it? The mating bond pulsed. Warm, almost. Almost. I didn't let myself feel it. I was too full of other things. Chapter 8. The morning meeting with Aldrich went exactly as expected. He wanted to mediate. He was smooth about it, framed it as generosity, as a neutral party offering stability for the sake of the wider territory. Caius said he would consider it. Which meant no, but with diplomacy wrapped around it. Kael said he would take it under advisement. Which, I suspected, meant the same thing with a different wrapping. Aldrich accepted both non-answers with the grace of a man who knew he'd planted a seed and was content to wait for rain. The summit formally concluded at noon. Handshakes. Document signings. The particular performance of civility that both packs executed with professional precision. I signed where indicated, my name on the revised articles, the Iron Veil seal beside Caius's formal mark. Selene Voss. The hyphen that contained everything. I watched my own handwriting and felt the familiar complicated press of it. Dren. A name I wore. A bond one carried. Voss. A name I was born into. A self I was increasingly afraid was fading. The delegations were packing up when Dara appeared at my elbow. I had, in the course of 2 summits, developed a cautious respect for Dara. She was precise. Economical. Not unkind, but not soft, the kind of woman who expressed respect through competence rather than warmth. The Article 7 revision, she said, without preamble. You saw it in 40 seconds. The wording was ambiguous, I said. Every lawyer and council member in that room had seen the same wording for 18 months. She looked at me steadily. None of them saw it. I didn't have a response to that. You're wasted, she said. Flatly. Simply. Like stating a geographical fact. I blinked. You're wasted, she repeated. Then, quieter, and you know it. She walked away. Left me standing there with the particular feeling of having been accurately diagnosed by someone I barely knew. You're wasted. And you know it. The vehicles were loading. Mira had already stowed our bags. I was doing a final check of the room I'd used, old habit, my father's training, leave a place the way you found it, Selene, so you can always return without apology. I was checking the bathroom when I heard it. Footsteps in the corridor. 2 sets. And then voices. I recognized both of them immediately. Kael. And Aldrich. My hand froze on the bathroom door. The corridor outside was partially visible through the small gap I'd left. I did not close the door further. I told myself this was not eavesdropping. I told myself I was simply present. I stayed very still. Been watching her all summit, Aldrich was saying. His voice was conversational. Pleasant. Not exactly subtle, Morrow. A pause. I don't know what you mean, Kael said. Level. Of course you don't. Aldrich's smile was audible. I'm only observing that Dren's mate is considerably more interesting than Dren appears to recognize. And that you appear to have noticed this before most. Another pause. Longer. She's mated, Kael said. Quiet. Hard. Technically, Aldrich agreed. Though I'll tell you what I've heard. There are those on the High Council who would argue that a mating bond sustained purely by political arrangement, with no evidence of, shall we say, fulfillment on either side, he paused delicately. It's not unheard of for such bonds to be formally contested. Silence. I pressed my back to the bathroom wall. My heart was very loud. Don't, Kael said. His voice had changed. The warmth stripped out of it. Something underneath, quiet and controlled and absolutely dangerous. Don't position her. Don't use her. She's not a lever. I'm not suggesting. Yes, you are. Flat. Final. You're suggesting that she's a pressure point. Between me and Caius. And if you move on her in any capacity, politically, personally, strategically, I will consider it an act of aggression against Ashbourne. A beat. That's a significant claim, Aldrich said carefully, over a woman who isn't yours. No, Kael said. Quietly. It's a significant claim over a woman who deserves better than being anyone's leverage. Including mine. Footsteps. One set moving away. Then the other. Then silence. I stood in the bathroom for 60 seconds exactly. Counting. Holding the wall. Breathing. He had claimed nothing. He had asked for nothing. He had simply told another alpha, don't use her. She deserves better than being anyone's leverage. Including mine. Including mine. He had included himself in the warning. He had set a limit on his own impulse. I pressed both hands flat against the bathroom wall. The cold tile was real. The tile was factual. The tile was not warm amber eyes and a voice stripped of its warmth by controlled anger. The tile was not she deserves better. The tile was not the feeling currently taking up all the space in my chest. I breathed. In. Out. You are mated, I told myself. Yes, something answered. And? I didn't have a response. We were in the vehicles and 20 minutes out from the lodge when my wolf acted without my permission. She had been patient. Months of patience. Months of low, reluctant hums and suppressed instincts and carefully locked doors. But she had heard she deserves better and something in her had made a decision. I pulled out plain paper from my bag. Pen. I wrote quickly. Small words. No header. I heard. Don't do that again, protect me at cost to yourself. But thank you. SV. I folded it. Addressed it to the Ashbourne administrative contact. Put it in the outer pocket of my bag for the council mail. And then I sat back and looked out at the mountains and knew with absolute certainty that I had just stepped off the edge of something I had been very carefully skirting for weeks. I had stepped off it deliberately. With both feet. And I could not decide if the feeling in my stomach was falling or flying. The reply came in 6 days. The fastest yet. SV. Some costs aren't costs. They're choices. Some things are worth choosing. KM. I read it. Read it again. Carefully placed it in the hollow spine. And sat for a very long time in the library with my father's law books around me like a fortress and my heart making decisions my rational mind had completely stopped supervising. The vision came that night. Not the gentle kind. Not the quiet two wolves in mist variety. This one arrived like cold water. Full immersion. Forest. Dark sky. Fire. 2 packs facing each other across a tree line, Ironvale's black and iron, Ashbourne's deep green. And in the space between them, a woman. Standing in the no man's land with both sides watching. The woman was me. I knew it the way you know yourself in dreams, not by my face but by the particular quality of my own consciousness. And from the Ashbourne side, a figure moving toward me. Steady. Deliberate. And from the Ironvale side, nothing. Stillness. An absence that said everything. The figure from Ashbourne reached me. Stopped. Extended a hand. I stared at it. Then looked back toward Ironvale. At the stillness. The absence. At the space where someone should have been moving toward me and wasn't. I looked back at the extended hand. And my vision self, the seer's daughter who had inherited her father's gift and her father's courage, reached out. And took it. I woke up at 4 in the morning. Rigid. Breathing hard. Sweat damp and completely certain. Seer visions weren't always literal. But they were always truthful. Something is coming, the gift had been saying for weeks. Now it showed me which way I'd choose. And I lay in the dark and pressed my hand to the mating bond, to the cold iron pulse of it, and I felt for the first time in 14 months that the cold was not something I had to endure. It was something I could leave. If I was willing to pay the price. Was I? I lay awake until sunrise. Watching the dark become gray become light. Thinking about fire. Thinking about 2 packs and 1 woman and an extended hand. Thinking about a man who had told another alpha, she deserves better than being anyone's leverage. Even mine. Even mine. Chapter 9. It started 3 days later. Not with a vision. Not with a warning. It started with Caius coming home from a high council meeting at 11 at night and going directly to the war room. And not coming out until morning. I knew this because I had stopped sleeping well and had therefore heard everything, the car arriving, the low voices, the weight of something serious settling over the house like a change in atmospheric pressure. My wolf felt it. That instinct that predated language, something is wrong. By morning, the house felt different. The energy that moves through a pack when the alpha is under strain, you could feel it in the wolves around me. In how they moved. Quicker. Less random. Every body oriented slightly toward the war room, the way compass needles orient toward north. Elena had dark shadows under her eyes. Marcus was clipped and efficient in a way that had shed all pretense of social function. Even the mid-rank wolves I passed in the corridors had that taut, compressed quality of people waiting for information they already halfway knew they weren't going to like. I found Mira in my room. She was sitting in the chair by the window. Not doing anything. Just sitting. That was how I knew it was serious. Mira was a person of constant motion. Stillness was not her default. What happened? I said. She looked at me. There was an incident on the Ashbourne border, she said. Last night. 2 Ironvale patrol wolves, she stopped. They're claiming they were attacked. My blood went cold. Claiming? The High Council isn't certain about the sequence of events. Myra's voice was very careful. The Ashbourne pack says the patrol entered their territory. The Iron Veil wolves say they were ambushed inside ours. She met my eyes. Caius has made a formal declaration of aggression. I sat down. What does that mean, formally? It means he's given the Ashbourne Pack 48 hours to acknowledge responsibility and offer reparation. A beat. Or he considers it an act of war. The room was very quiet. Was it their wolves? I said. The attack. Do we know? Mira shook her head slowly. That's the thing. No one knows. The patrol account is inconsistent. And there's a third option that nobody is saying loudly. She dropped her voice. That someone wanted this to look like an Ashbourne aggression. I stared at her. Aldrich Vane, I said. Quietly. Mira looked at me. His territory borders both packs at that exact section of line, I said. I was thinking out loud. If the two largest packs go to war with each other, he steps in as mediator, Mira said. And ends up controlling both. Silence. Has anyone suggested this to Caius? I said. Who would suggest it to Caius? Mira said, and the exhaustion in her voice was not just tiredness. It was the exhaustion of 14 months of watching a man who didn't take suggestions. I stood up. I would, I said. The war room door was closed. Marcus was outside it, functional as a wall. He's in meeting, Marcus said. I need 5 minutes, I said. He's in meeting, Marcus repeated. I looked at him steadily. Tell him, I said, that I have information about the Ashbourne incident that he doesn't currently have. Tell him I'll be in the library. He can come find me or not. Marcus's expression did a complicated thing. I'll pass the message, he said carefully. I went to the library. Sat down. Opened nothing. Looked at the wall. 12 minutes later, the door opened. Caius looked like he hadn't slept. Which was disorienting on his particular face. He was someone who maintained control of his presentation with such consistency that seeing the seams of it was almost shocking. His jaw was set. His eyes were that frozen water gray, but with something hotter underneath. He came in. Closed the door. Stood. Speak, he said. I told him. Carefully. Logically. Following the thread from Aldrich's presence at the summit to his obvious strategy of wedging between the two packs, to the suspicious timing of an incident that would benefit precisely one party, to the inconsistencies in the patrol account. I spoke for 4 minutes. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was very still. You think Vane staged it, he said. I think it's possible. I think it's worth investigating before I declare war. His voice was flat. Yes. Silence. He turned away from me. Walked to the window, his default, and stood there looking at something. The patrol account is inconsistent, he said. Quietly. More to himself than to me. Yes. I know this. A pause. I have known this. I stared at his back. He had known. He had made the declaration anyway. Because retraction, once given, was its own form of vulnerability. Because being challenged, genuinely, by an outside force, and not responding immediately with overwhelming weight was something his pride didn't know how to absorb. I had learned this about him in 14 months. Pride and power, wound together so tightly he couldn't separate them. Caius, I said. He didn't turn. If you go to war with Ashbourne Pack on an inconsistent account, and it later emerges that Vane staged the incident, you will have handed him everything he wanted. A pause. Both packs weakened. Your credibility damaged. His entry point established. Silence. Long. The kind that had weather in it. And if I retract the declaration, he said. Still not turning. You give Kael Morrow 48 hours to produce his own account of the border incident. You request High Council mediation on the sequence of events. You investigate Westmore's movements on the night in question. I paused. And if it was Ashbourne, you go to war with evidence instead of assumption. Another silence. Longer. You've been thinking about this since you heard, he said. Since this morning, I confirmed. He turned then. Looked at me. His face was doing something I'd never seen before, the controlled mask had fractured somewhere. Not broken. Fractured. I could see something underneath. Not the frozen water. Something that had maybe been water before it froze. Why, he said. I blinked. Why what? Why does it matter to you? He held my gaze. Direct. Unguarded in a way he almost never was. The outcome of this. The pack's position. My political standing. A pause. Why does any of it matter to you? The question hit me somewhere unprepared. I looked at him. Thought about the right answer. Decided on the true one. Because I live here, I said quietly. Because this pack is my home whether I chose it or not. Because war has consequences that reach everyone, not just the alphas who declare it. A beat. And because I stopped. What? I think you're smarter than this decision, I said. And it would be wasteful for you to be less than you are because pride got in the way of information. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the wind outside. Caius looked at me for a long time. Something moving across his face that I didn't have a name for. I'll delay the declaration, he said finally. Pending investigation. He walked to the door. Stopped with his hand on the frame. Selene. Yes? He seemed to search for something. Whatever he found, he kept it. Thank you, he said. 2 words. First time. In 14 months. Thank you. He left. I sat in the library alone and felt the complicated wreckage of it, the gratitude, the grief, the bitter irony of being finally, slightly seen by someone too late, too little, too. No, I told myself. Not too late. Not decided yet. You don't know. But the vision rose behind my eyes anyway. The no man's land. The stillness from one side. The extended hand from the other. And my hand, reaching. Some things are worth choosing, the folded note said from its hiding place. Some things are worth choosing. That night I wrote the most dangerous letter yet. KM. There may be a war coming that isn't what it looks like. The Greywood precedent establishes right of account. Both packs have the legal right to submit their version of events for High Council review before a declaration stands. Request it. Formal. Immediately. Trust me on this. SV. I held the paper for a long time. This wasn't legal theory. This wasn't precedent sharing. This was me actively working to prevent a war, by passing information to my mate's enemy. This was the line. The clear, unmistakable line. I was across it the moment I folded the paper. I knew it. My wolf knew it. The mating bond knew it. It pulsed with something sharp and strange, like a string pulled past its tension point. I put it in the council mail anyway. Because 17 people would die in the first wave of a war between these packs. Because a 20-year-old scout had gotten lost in a snowstorm and almost been destroyed for it. Because the alternative was silence, and I had decided, sometime between the washroom mirror and the folded notes in the law book and the vision in the dark, that I was done choosing silence. I sealed the envelope. And I chose. Chapter 10. The investigation took 4 days. 4 days of Caius's inner circle moving quietly through the pack, pulling threads, cross-referencing accounts, sending discreet inquiries to council archives about Westmore Pack's territorial movements. 4 days of the house holding its breath. For days of me going about my routine, library, meals, the small domestic architecture of a life, while carrying the knowledge of what I had done like a stone pressed flat against my sternum. The letter was sent. It couldn't be unsent. I had crossed the line and I was living on the other side of it now, and the strange thing, the thing I hadn't expected, was that the other side didn't feel like I'd thought it would. I'd expected guilt. I'd expected the cold, sick certainty of having done something wrong. What I felt instead was quiet. Like a decision made after a long argument with yourself, where the argument was exhausting but the decision is simply true. I had chosen. And something in me had stopped fighting itself. Kael's formal request for High Council review arrived on the second day. Caius brought it to the library himself, which was unusual enough that I set down my book without him asking. He handed me the document. I read it. It cited exactly the precedent I had referenced. The Greywood Mediation. Article 9. Right of account for both parties before a declaration could stand. Precise. Accurate. Immediate. Trust me on this. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. He moved quickly, I said. Within 18 hours of my delay, Caius said. He was watching me. Not suspicious, or not only suspicious. Something more like curious. He has good legal counsel, I said. He cited the same precedent you cited at the first summit, Caius said. Quietly. Silence. 1 beat. 2. The Greywood mediation is well established, I said. Any competent legal advisor would know it. Caius looked at me for a moment longer. Then he took the document back. The High Council has accepted the review request, he said. Westmore's border movements on the night in question are being examined. A pause. We should know within 48 hours. He left. I sat with my hands flat on the table and breathed very carefully. He hadn't accused me. He didn't know. But he had noticed the coincidence of the precedent, the timing, the speed of Kael's response. He had noticed and he had filed it. Caius was not a man who discarded observations. He was a man who waited for enough of them to accumulate into a pattern. I had 48 hours before the investigation concluded. And the feeling of quiet decision was still there in my chest. But underneath it now, something with sharper edges. The shape of consequence. The confirmation came in 36 hours. Not 48. Aldrich Vane's pack had moved 2 scouts into the border section on the night in question. The Council's territorial tracking, satellite markers and old pack law witness chains placed them within proximity of the incident. The Iron Veil Patrol's account, re-examined, showed a directional inconsistency that placed the point of engagement inside disputed territory, not clearly inside Iron Veil land. Not Ashbourne aggression. A staged provocation. A very careful, very patient, manufactured crisis, designed to light a fire between 2 packs while the man who struck the match stood far enough back to avoid the heat. Caius called a full inner circle meeting. He did not call me. But he did not tell me to leave when I appeared in the doorway of the war room. He looked at me for 1 moment. Then looked back at his circle. She stays, he said. Elena's eyes moved to me briefly. Something in them that wasn't quite a smile. Wasn't far from one. The meeting was 2 hours. Strategy. Response. How to address Westmore without triggering the exact kind of interpack conflict Aldrich had been trying to manufacture. How to communicate the findings to Ashbourne without losing face. How to present a unified front to the High Council while internally absorbing the embarrassment of having nearly gone to war on a false account. I spoke 4 times. Each time, Caius listened. Not performed listening, the real kind, where the information actually changes the shape of what comes next. By the end of the meeting, a strategy had formed that was careful, precise, legally defensible, and likely to cost Aldrich Vane his observer status with the High Council permanently. It wasn't my strategy. It was collaborative. But my threads were woven through it. When the circle dispersed, Marcus passed me in the doorway and said, very quietly, "Good." Just that. Good. From Marcus, that was an oration. Mira was waiting in my room. She had the expression she wore when she'd been doing her own quiet intelligence gathering and had found something she wasn't sure how to deliver. "What?" I said. "Elena came to see me," she said. I stilled. "When?" "This afternoon. While you were in the war room." I sat down slowly. "What did she want?" Mira sat across from me. Her hands were folded in her lap, a contained, careful gesture. "She asked," Mira said, "how long the letters had been going on." The room went very quiet. I heard my own breathing. "She knows," I said. "Not a question." Mira nodded. "She's known for at least 2 weeks," Mira said. "She monitors the council mail, not officially, but..." "It's her function," I said. "Yes." Myra's eyes were very steady. Frightened, but steady. "Selene. She hasn't told him." I stared. "She watched the investigation," Mira continued. "She watched you go to him with the vein theory. She watched you in the war room today." A breath. "She came to me to tell me that she has made a decision. About what she considers worth reporting." Something enormous was happening in my chest. "She's not going to tell him," I said. "Not today," Mira said carefully. She said, she stopped. Looked at her hands. She said, "Tell her that the bond can be formally contested. That the mechanism exists. That she is not as trapped as she believes." The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever heard. Elena, Caius's beta female, had looked at my life and made a choice. A choice that cost her something. A choice that said, some traps are not cages. Some doors have always been unlocked. My eyes burned. I did not let them. "Why?" I said. My voice was steady. "Barely." Mira looked at me. "Because she's watched him for 5 years," she said softly. "And she's watched you for 14 months. And she knows the difference between a mating that serves a pack," she paused. "And one that serves 2 people." I went to the garden that evening. It was barely a garden, more a section of the Iron Vale grounds where someone had once attempted cultivation and then apparently given up, leaving a few hardy shrubs and a stone bench and the suggestion of ambition. I sat on the bench. Cold air. Stars beginning. The mating bond pulsed in my chest. I sat with it, really sat with it, instead of filing it away. Felt its shape. Cold. Present. Real. But also, I had never noticed this before, thin. Not deep. Not the kind of bond that grew because 2 people had built something in each other. The kind that existed because law and blood had pressed 2 wolves together and called it enough. Some bonds are chosen, the voice in my first vision had said. And those are the ones that cannot be broken. A chosen bond. Not inherited. Not arranged. Chosen. I thought about every time I had not chosen. Every moment where choosing had not been offered. And then I thought about the hollow spine of a law book. A folded note. SV. KM. 2 people writing in the dark. Choosing, word by word, to be honest with each other across every border that said they shouldn't. That was choice. That was the real kind. I sat in the almost garden under the beginning stars and I made a decision. Not an action yet. Not a step. Just a decision. I am not as trapped as I believe. And for the first time in 14 months, the thought didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like coming home. Chapter 11. 2 things happened the next morning. The first, Caius came to breakfast. He had never come to breakfast before. I was at the small table in the east dining room, my usual morning routine, alone with coffee and whatever I was reading, when he appeared in the doorway. He was dressed. Present. Carrying a cup of his own coffee. He looked at the table. At me. I looked at him. "May I?" he said. I stared for a moment. "Of course," I said. He sat down. We had breakfast in the same room. He read a document. I read my book. We didn't speak. But we were in the same room. Voluntarily. At the same table. And it was strange. Not warm. Not cold. Just present. Like something had shifted a single degree. Not enough to change the direction. But enough to notice. The second thing that happened was the knock on my door at 11. A wolf I didn't recognize, young, carrying himself with Ashbourne's looser body language. He handed me a sealed envelope without a word and left. Not council mail. Hand-delivered. No address. No administrative routing. Just my name. Selene. Not Voss Dren. Just Selene. I looked at the envelope for a moment. Then I took it to the library. Closed the door. Opened it. Selene. The High Council has confirmed Vane's involvement. Ashbourne has submitted its full account. The declaration is being formally withdrawn. I know you sent the letter. I don't mean the one that cited the Greywood precedent. I mean all of them. I know because I would have done the same. Because when something is true, you reach for it regardless of whether you're supposed to. I need to say something clearly, so that you can decide what to do with it. You asked me once, or the context of our conversation asked it, why I kept looking. The answer is that I saw you the first moment. Not what you represent. Not the bloodline or the legal mind or the political asset. You. The woman counting ceiling panels. The woman who cited Article 9 for a boy she didn't know. The woman who writes on plain paper with her birth initials because there's a part of her that refuses to be erased. I am not asking you for anything. I am not positioning you or leveraging you or using you as a pressure point. I am simply telling you the truth, because you deserve the truth plainly. I would choose you. If choosing were possible, I would choose you. What you do with that is entirely yours. K. I read it 3 times. The first time my vision blurred midway through and I had to stop. The second time I read it slowly, deliberately, feeling each sentence land in sequence. The third time I read it like I was memorizing it. Because I was. I sat in the library for 20 minutes. Then I picked up a pen. And I wrote the truest thing I had ever put on paper. Kael. I have a seer's gift that I have been suppressing for 14 months. Last night I let it speak. It showed me a choice. It didn't tell me what the cost would be. Gifts never do, my father said that was the design. Seeing the choice clearly enough to make it, without the weight of consequence distorting the vision. I am going to make a formal request to the High Council. For contested bond review. I don't know how long it takes. I don't know what it will cost. I know that the bond one carry was never chosen. And I know that some things are worth choosing. You said that. Approximately. I believe it. Selene. Not Voss Dren. Just Selene. I sealed it. Held it. The mating bond pulsed. But this time, underneath its cold weight, I felt something else. My own heartbeat. Strong. Real. Mine. I gave the letter to Mira. Can you get this out today? I said. She looked at the envelope. At me. Are you sure? She said. I thought about 14 months of silence. Of cold beds and empty tables and candles burning down to nothing. I thought about a man who had said, She deserves better than being anyone's leverage. Including mine. I thought about Elena, who had looked at my life and decided a door was worth opening. I thought about my father, who had taught me that prophecy was pattern recognition at a scale most people couldn't perceive. I had perceived the pattern. Yes, I said. Mira took the envelope. Okay, she said. She left. I found Caius in his office that afternoon. I knocked. He said, "Come in." He was at his desk, he had papers, the familiar architecture of a man who processed the world through documentation. He looked up. And something in my face told him this was not a routine conversation. He set down his pen. "Sit down," he said. I sat. I looked at him. This man who was cold and proud and more complicated than I had initially let myself see. This man who had said thank you for the first time in 14 months. Who had come to breakfast this morning. Who had, in his own way, limited, belated, insufficient, been trying. I owed him honesty. "I need to tell you something," I said. He was still. Watchful. "I've been in correspondence with Kael Morrow," I said. Through the council mail. Over the past several weeks. The quality of his stillness shifted. Not explosion, I had expected explosion. Something colder. And then, something I hadn't expected. Underneath the cold. Pain. Actual, legible pain. "How long?" he said. Quiet. "Since the first summit." A silence. "The letters were not what you're thinking," I said carefully. "Legal precedent. Diplomatic exchange. Information about Vane, at the end." I paused. "But I won't pretend they were entirely professional. That would be dishonest. And you deserve honesty." He was very quiet. His hands were flat on the desk. "Why?" he said. The second time he'd asked me that question. But this time the shape of it was different. This time he wasn't asking why it mattered. He was asking why it had happened. Why she had looked elsewhere. And I thought, carefully, kindly, about how to answer truly. "Because I was lonely," I said. "Because I had been invisible for 14 months. And he saw me." I held Caius's gaze. "I'm not saying this to wound you. I'm saying it because you asked, and you deserve the real answer." The silence lasted a long time. Caius looked at his hands. Then at the window. Then back at me. "I have not been," he stopped. Started again. "I am aware that I have not been what this bond required." I stared at him. "I am not," he paused again. The words seemed to cost him. "Warmth does not come easily to me. I know this. I have known it as a failing and I have not," he closed his eyes briefly. "I have not addressed it. I didn't speak. Let the space hold." "Is it too late?" he said. Very quietly. And there it was. The question I had been dreading. Not because the answer was complicated. Because the answer was simple and the simple answer was going to hurt someone. "I don't know," I said. Honestly. Because I didn't. Not entirely. The vision showed me reaching for an extended hand. It didn't show me what I was leaving. It didn't show me whether leaving was the only path or the chosen one. "I've submitted a formal request," I said quietly. "For contested bond review. To the High Council." The words landed. I watched them land. Watched something in Caius's face absorb the impact. He didn't rage. He didn't threaten. He sat at his desk with the controlled stillness that I had once read as coldness and now could see was complicated. A man who had built armor so thorough he'd forgotten what was underneath it. "All right," he said. Just that. "All right. I would like," he stopped. "I would like to know, before the process concludes, whether there is anything I could, another stop. Whether there is anything I could do. He couldn't finish it. But I heard it. And something in me, some surviving tenderness for the human complexity of even the most difficult people, ached at it. I'll think about that, I said. Honestly. He nodded once. I got up. At the door, I paused. Caius. He looked up. The breakfast this morning, I said. That was something. If you'd done that 14 months ago, I stopped. It would have mattered. He said nothing. But his jaw shifted. And I left him in his office with whatever it is that very proud people feel when they understand, finally and too slowly, what they have let slip through their hands. Chapter 12. The High Council's response to the contested bond review came in 9 days. 9 days of the House existing in a strange suspension, not hostile, not warm, but altered. Caius had begun having breakfast in the East dining room every morning. We still didn't speak much. But he was present. And presence, I was learning, was both more and less than I had needed for so long. It was too late to be enough. And not nothing. Both at once. The review process, the Council's letter explained, would take between 30 and 60 days. Both parties would be interviewed. The bond would be assessed for what the formal language called substantive fulfillment, a clinical phrase for the question, did this bond ever become what it was supposed to be, or had it remained purely transactional? I read the letter twice. Then I put it down and went for a walk in the almost garden. The hardy shrubs had been trimmed. I noticed this because I passed them every day and they had never been trimmed before. Someone had trimmed them. In the last 9 days. I stopped. Looked at the shrubs. Looked at the stone bench. Thought about a man doing a very small, quiet thing because he had run out of larger ones. My chest ached. Not with love. With the particular grief of things that could have been different. Of roads not taken. Of warmth that came too late to be a home. Mira brought me the reply that afternoon. Same route. Hand delivered. My name in his handwriting. Selene. I heard asterisk. I won't ask what happens next. I won't ask you to choose faster than is true. What I know about Sears, your father's writings, what little is public, is that the gift shows what is, not what should be. So if your gift shows you a choice, it's because the choice is real. I am in Ashbourne. I am not going anywhere. I am not waiting, waiting implies expectation, and you owe me nothing. But I'm here. That's all. That's simply true. Kael. I folded the letter. Put it in my pocket instead of the hollow spine. Wanted it closer. The day I went to the High Council interview, Caius walked me to the car. This had never happened. He stopped at the vehicle door. He looked at me. There was something in his face, exposed in a way I had never seen it. All the architecture of control and pride and performance slightly dismantled, showing what was underneath. Just a person. Complicated and limited and, I thought, probably genuinely doing his best, even when his best had not been close to enough. I want to say something, he said. I waited. I know I failed you, he said. Direct. No performance in it. I know the specific ways and I know they were significant. I am not asking you to, he stopped. Started again. I am simply saying. I see it. I saw it too late. But I see it. My throat was very tight. Thank you, I said. And meant it. He opened the car door. I got in. He closed it. And stood on the steps of the iron Anstone house as the car pulled away. I didn't look back. I looked forward. The High Council interview lasted 3 hours. They asked careful questions. About the origin of the bond. About its nature. About what had and hadn't developed in 14 months. I answered honestly. All of it. Not to wound. Not to win. Simply because honesty, my father had always said, was the only gift you could give that didn't diminish with use. The council member at the center, an older woman, silver-haired, with eyes that had clearly done this before and found it no less serious for the repetition, looked at me at the end. You have a seer's gift, she said. Dormant for some time, I said. It's been waking. What does it show you? I thought about the vision. The no man's land. The stillness on one side. The extended hand. My own hand, reaching. A choice, I said. Made clearly. She nodded once. Made a notation. The review will proceed, she said. The day the council's preliminary finding arrived, day 41 of the review period, I was in the library. The finding was what the formal language called assessment of bond insufficiency. Grounds for formal dissolution were established, pending final interview and 30-day waiting period. I held the paper. My heart was doing something large and complicated. Not relief entirely. Not grief entirely. The specific emotional weight of an ending, even a necessary one, even a right one, because endings have their own gravity regardless of what comes after. I wrote one more letter. Kael. 41 days. Almost. I want to tell you something about the vision I saw. In it, I was standing between two sides. And I reached for a hand. I've been thinking about what that means. As a seer's daughter, I've learned that visions show the truth of a moment, not a guarantee of what follows. So I want to be honest about what I'm choosing, and why, so that it's not the vision doing the choosing. It's me. I choose, the man who asked if I was all right. I choose, the man who told another alpha she deserved better than leverage. I choose, the man who writes on plain paper and looks up citations and says I'm here without requiring anything in return. I choose you. Not because of the vision. Because of every small, real, true thing that has accumulated between us. Because some bonds are chosen. And this one, if you'll have it, is mine to give. 30 days, they said. I'll count them. Selene. I sent it. Then I sat in the library and breathed. Outside the window, the season had finally turned. April now, actual spring, the kind with green underneath the cold. The almost garden had one small cluster of early flowers that I hadn't noticed before. White. Very small. Growing in the gap between the stone bench and the old wall. The kind of thing that grows in unlikely places. The kind of thing that grows because it found enough light in a small opening and simply grew. I pressed my palm to the glass. Felt the warmth of the spring sun, thin and real. Felt the mating bond. Still there. For 30 more days. And felt, underneath it, new and clear and entirely chosen. Something warm. Something mine. Something that had grown in the gap between letters, in the space between words, in the small openings of borrowed honesty and plain paper and a man who had said, some trespasses are worth the consequence. The last day of the waiting period came on a Thursday. I thought about the last Thursday I had counted. The candles. The lamb. The quiet decision to stop waiting. And I thought about how that ending, which had felt like nothing, had been the beginning of everything that followed. The bond dissolved at midnight. I was in bed. I felt it go. Not violently. The way ice releases, a slow softening, a return to the form that water prefers. The cold thread that had lived in my chest for 14 months simply loosened. And was gone. I lay in the dark. Breathed. Put my hand to my sternum. Felt my own heartbeat. Strong. Clear. Mine. Mira was outside my door in the morning. She took one look at my face. And she smiled, wide and real and slightly tearful. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. She hugged me. Fiercely. What now, she said into my shoulder. I thought about it. Now I go find out, I said, what it feels like to reach for a hand when the choice is free. I drove myself. No delegation. No protocol. No administrative routing. Just a car and a spring morning and the road through the pine-black forest that I had traveled 3 times before with an entourage and a role to play. This time I was no one's formal presentation. No one's political asset. No one's bloodline. Just Selene. Just myself. The Ashbourne border was marked by a simple stone post, weathered, unglamorous, the kind of marker that said here is a line without any of the Iron and Fortress drama of Ironvale's boundaries. I stopped the car. Got out. Stood at the line for a moment. The forest on the other side smelled like rain and dark earth and that specific, living scent that had haunted me for months. My wolf was very quiet. The attentive kind of quiet. The kind that isn't waiting. The kind that already knows. He was there. Not at the border, not waiting dramatically at the line like someone had choreographed it. He was 50 meters into Ashbourne territory, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the tree line, apparently reading something. He looked up when I crossed the border. Like he'd felt it. Like something had told him. He stood. He didn't move toward me. He let me cross the distance. Let me choose each step of it. I stopped 4 feet from him. The amber eyes. The ease in his body. The specific, impossible warmth of him, close now, closer than any of the brief moments in neutral lodges and borrowed corridors. Close enough to be real. 30 days, he said. 30 days, I confirmed. A pause. Are you all right? He said. And there it were again. Those 2 words. The first 2 words he had ever said to me. The same words. And this time, unlike that February morning in a neutral lodge when they had cracked something open in a chest I hadn't known was sealed. This time I had an answer. Yes, I said. And meant it. Completely. He exhaled. Like he'd been holding something for a long time and had just set it down. He extended his hand. Not reaching for me. Offering. Available. The vision rose behind my eyes, the no man's land, the extended hand, my own hand reaching. I looked at it. Then at him. Then I reached out. And took it. His hand was warm. Solid. The grip of it, not possessive, not commanding. Just present. Just real. Just chosen. My wolf exhaled. Something I hadn't known she was holding. And in the space between us, in this small opening at the edge of a forest, at the border of 2 territories, in the unlikely place where things grow because they find enough light. Something settled. Not the cold certainty of a law-made bond. Something better. The warm, clear certainty of a thing freely given. I choose you. Both of us, in the same moment. Both of us choosing. We stood at the edge of the Ashbourne forest in the April morning, hand in hand, and I told him about the vision. He listened the way he always listened, really listened, with his whole attention, like what I was saying was the most important information currently available. The pale wolf and the dark one, he said when I finished. Running toward each other. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I had a dream, he said. 3 months ago. Before the first summit. I looked at him. Forest, he said. Silver mist. A wolf I didn't recognize, but that I knew, the way you know things in dreams. He paused. I looked it up afterward. In the old records. Seers sometimes project, when the gift is waking. Images of significance. He met my eyes. I think you found me before you knew you were looking. I stared at him. You think I sent you that dream? I think your gift did, he said. Yes. My father's voice, from somewhere, prophecy is just pattern recognition at a scale most people can't perceive. My gift had recognized the pattern. Months before I had. I laughed, surprised out of me, the same way he'd surprised a laugh out of me on a cold deck in February. He smiled. That real smile. The one that had nothing calculated in it. Your laugh, he said, softly. I've been thinking about it for months. It's a fairly ordinary laugh, I said. No, he said. It isn't. And something in the way he said it, simple, direct, without performance, landed in the center of me. Like a key. Like a door opening. Like warmth in a small opening where something had decided to grow. I called Mira that evening. Well, she said, without preamble. Well, I said. Selene. I tried to find the word. It was like breathing properly. For the first time in a long time. A silence. Then Mira, in a voice slightly thicker than her usual tone, good. Good. That's exactly what it should feel like. Are you crying? I said. Absolutely not, she said. Don't make it weird. I smiled. I'm going to be all right, Mira. I know, she said. I always knew. Did you? I told you, she said, that kindness can break you open when you're not used to it. You warned me, I said. Yes, she said. And you ignored me. And it was the best decision you ever made. I thought about Caius sometimes, in the weeks that followed. Not with longing. Not with anger. With the complex, human tenderness that you can sometimes find for people who hurt you not out of malice but out of limitation. He had been limited. I had needed more than limited. I heard, through the pack networks that ran their own quiet intelligence, that he had begun to change things. Small things. Breakfast in the East dining room, with his inner circle. An open-door policy in his office that had not existed before. Elena, Marcus said, had told him once, bluntly, in the way only a long-time beta could, that he had learned too slowly and lost something that had deserved better. He had apparently listened. Growth, I thought. Late and limited and probably insufficient for whoever came next into his life. But growth. People were complicated that way. Even the cold ones. Even the proud ones. Even the ones who came to breakfast too late and trimmed the shrubs in the almost garden when the words had run out. In June, I met Kael's pack. I had been nervous about this in a way I hadn't expected, the seer's daughter, unafraid of complex political negotiations, quietly terrified of a Sunday dinner with a group of wolves who would be assessing whether I was what their alpha had chosen. They were loud. That was the first thing. Loud and warm and entirely unconcerned with formal presentation. RHY, the young wolf who had sat beside me at the first summit and told me Kael had said to treat me like a person, spotted me from across the room and said, very loudly, that's her. The one who cited Article 9. And every wolf in the room turned. And then, inexplicably, someone started clapping. Someone else joined in. Within 5 seconds, the entire room was applauding a legal citation from 4 months ago. I stood in the doorway, completely overwhelmed. Kael appeared at my shoulder. They're a lot, he said. Apologetically. They're wonderful, I said. He looked at me. Something in his face so open it was almost difficult to hold. Yes, he said quietly. They are. And then RHY appeared, grabbed my arm, and began an extremely enthusiastic explanation of everyone in the room by name, personality, and worst habit. Dara found me later, on the deck. Stars out now. Cool June air. She stood beside me for a moment without speaking. Then, you're going to be asked, eventually, about formalizing things. She looked at the stars. Pack recognition. Legal standing. All of it. She paused. It doesn't have to happen fast. I know, I said. But it will happen, she said. Simply. Not a pressure. Not a directive. A fact. The kind you could rest against. I know that too, I said. She nodded. Good, she said. And then, after a moment, so brief I almost missed it. He hasn't been this, she stopped. Found the word. This present. In years. I looked at her. He carries a lot, she said. The pack. The politics. The history with Ironvale. A pause. He carries it alone. Usually. I understood what she was saying. I understood because I had carried things alone for 14 months and I knew the specific weight of it. Not anymore, I said. Dara looked at me. And smiled, small, real, nothing performed in it. No, she said. Not anymore. My seer gift fully woke in July. Not with a vision. With a certainty. I was standing in Kael's library, because of course he had a library, of course he did, floor to ceiling with pack history and law and star charts, and I pulled a book from the shelf and it fell open to a page and there, in the margin, in handwriting I didn't recognize. Some bonds are chosen. And those are the ones that cannot be broken. I stood very still. The exact words. From the first vision. Months ago. I turned to the front of the book. Old. The cover worn, the spine fragile. A personal copy, the inscription inside read. The name. Selene Voss. My father's name. My father's copy. My father's marginalia. My father, who had died before I came to Ironvale, who had never met Kael Morrow, who had spent his life at the edge of 3 pack territories researching star patterns and pack law and the nature of prophetic gifts. Had stood in this library. Had left this book. Had written these words. I pressed my hand over the inscription. Felt something settle, deep and final and full, in the center of my chest. He had known, my gift whispered. He had known you would find your way here. He had left you a word. I closed the book carefully. Held it. Breathed. And the gift moved through me, fully awake now, no longer dormant, no longer suppressed, like light through water. Like pattern recognition at a scale most people couldn't perceive. I perceived it. Every thread. Every choice. Every small act of honesty on plain paper that had led me across a border to a library to a book to a word left by a man who loved me enough to trust me to find my own way home. I found Kael in the garden. He was doing nothing, something I'd learned he did occasionally, just standing in the sun doing nothing, which was the most quietly radical thing about him. I walked up beside him. Handed him the book without explanation. He looked at it. Turned it to the inscription. Read the name. Looked at me. And in his amber eyes, warm as always, warm as the first moment, warm as every moment between the first and this one. Understanding. Complete and wordless and certain. He opened his arms. And I stepped into them. And I let myself be held. Really held. Not a performed gesture. Not a political statement. Not the cold acknowledgement of a bond made from law and bloodline and strategic calculation. The real thing. The chosen thing. The kind that, once given, cannot be taken back. I pressed my face against his shoulder and felt his arms wrap around me and felt his heartbeat, steady, present, his, against mine. And I thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like. Not the grand declaration. Not the dramatic moment. Just this. 2 people choosing each other in a garden in July with the sun warm and the pack loud somewhere inside and a book with my father's handwriting resting in the grass beside us. Some bonds are chosen. And those are the ones that cannot be broken. I am Selene Voss. I am 24 years old. I have silver-gray eyes that my mother once called moon-touched. I am a seer's daughter. I am a legal mind and a diplomat and a woman who counted ceiling panels in a negotiation room and wrote letters on plain paper with her birth initials. I am someone who was hungry for a very long time and learned, finally, to reach for what was offered. I am not a bloodline. I am not a political asset. I am not a formal presentation. I am not what someone arranged me to be. I am what I chose to become. And I am, for the first time in a very long time. Completely, quietly, genuinely. All right. The end. She was his by law. But she was her own by choice. And in the end, that was the only bond that mattered. If this story found something in you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear that choosing yourself is not betrayal. It's the beginning.